Hey guys, HaloTheorist back here with my 8th podcast, and today I'm joined by my good friends Noah and Colin. If you guys would like to say hi.
What's up?
Hello.
All right, hey, how's it going, guys? It's great to be here again. I hope you guys enjoy being back on the podcast. I have a fucking great time talking with you guys on the podcast about this, especially in the bigger groups. But today, what we're going to be talking about is Alpha 9. And for those of you who don't know who or what Alpha 9 is, Alpha 9 is a small fire team that is directed by the Office of Naval Intelligence, or ONI, and it's under the command of Edward Buck, who originally starts as an ODST, or an orbital shock trooper, which is a very high class soldier, so to speak, in the UNSC military. And under his command, there's been a number of people through the squad roster, many of which are not actually seen when we are introduced to them, or at least into Alpha 9 in the game Halo 3 ODST. And from there, that's kind of where I'm going to start this podcast and this talk, is talking about Alpha 9, the members of them, and the game in which we meet them in, which is ODST. And the first person I'd like to talk about is actually going to be the squad leader, Edward Buck. Edward Buck has been in operation, or at least against the Covenant within the UNSC, for a very, very long time. He was born on August 22nd, 2510, and became an orbital shock trooper not very long after that. Most of his early life and career was in an outer colony. Again, an outer colony that we know that was also glassed. At the age of 18, he enlisted, and eventually, until the end of 2531, he would become a ODST, or an orbital shock trooper. Now, ODSTs are very different from what we see actually in the Halo universe with the Spartans. The Spartans are, kidnapped as kids, usually, at least for the Spartan 2s, and then for the Spartan 3s, they were also used again as kids, and the Spartan 4s were ended up being adults. But the ODSTs, actually, from the get-go, have always been the same. They've always been troopers, or Marines that were very good at doing what they do, and were selected to become ODSTs, or designated a more specific name, or a more likely name, as Hell Jumper. And they were given Hell Jumper the name because they actually use what's known as an orbital drop pod in order to be thrown into battle behind the lines. And upon atmospheric entry, because the orbital drop pods are launched from upper atmosphere, if not totally from space, it's very heated and becomes very hot within the pod, and so they earn the name Hell Jumper. Now, Hell Jumpers are known for being gritty, dirty, and being able to get the job done, and have a very close-knit community, kind of similar to the Spartans. However, they're not very fond of the Spartans. And later in this podcast, I'll kind of talk more about their relationship with the Spartans. And funny enough, how Noah, I believe, is going to talk here a little bit, how most of these people become Spartans as well. But moving on to the rest of the squad that we normally see, at least throughout the game Halo 3 ODST, are going to be the other squad members of Alpha 9, which is going to be Dutch, Romeo, Mickey, and actually the character that you play as in-game, which is going to be the Rookie. Now, Buck, as we know, has been through the military for a very long time, and has been dealing with the Covenant for a very long time. In fact, at the beginning of Halo 3 ODST, Veronica Dare, which I'll get to here in a minute after explaining the squad, asked him, if they were replacements, and he actually states the line, "This late in the war, who is it?" As I had said earlier, with Alpha 9, there are many members of the squad who currently aren't alive. There's actually a grand total of 5 people who have died under Buck's command. And so the new squad, consisting of Dutch, Romeo, Mickey, and the Rookie, are who we see as we enter into Halo 3 ODST. And in there, we actually are also introduced to Veronica Dare, who is, and as Buck likes to call her, an Oni spook, or an Oni officer, who doesn't really give a lot of information, as more of a do as I say in my orders. When I say them, it's a kind of on the need to know basis. And from there, the last character, and I would say probably the most important character that we kind of talk about, is the Rookie. And for that, I know Noah knows a little bit about the Rookie and would like to talk a little bit about his character, how he is, and how he's kind of been betrayed, similar to how we see some other games like Halo Reach. And so, Noah, if you'd kind of like to talk about the Rookie, and maybe even his story as far as it goes.
Yeah, so the Rookie is an interesting addition to Halo and is a very unique player character when it comes to the Halo series because he is sort of a blank slate. Not much is known about his history besides that he's a Lance Corporal and his initials are JD.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually have a little bit of background into some of his missions that he's done and some of the extended lore. But for what you, the player, knows in the game, you don't really know much about this character other than he's the new guy on the squad, the FNG, and he has very little to say. Since he is a rather quiet character, it's something that a lot of people enjoyed because it was something that allowed themselves to become more immersed within the game. You take time, you're playing with this character, you're imagining yourself in the situation as you run through the streets in at night and take on all sorts of covenant with the rest of the squad. And I think another thing that's important to note with the rookie is that he's a really good contrast to the crazy and outgoing personalities that we see throughout the rest of Alpha 9 because every single member of that squad has a very different personality and they're very unique characters. They each have their own set of things that you know about them. Like Mickey's the wisecracking jokes type of character. Buck is portrayed by Nathan Fillion, who's an excellent voice actor, and you get a lot of that charisma in him and his character.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Veronica Dare is that Oni spook, as you were mentioning, and you see that with the way she acts and talks. And so, having the rookie be the silent observer type and to be something that you can put yourself into his shoes was definitely a good choice for this particular campaign. It was definitely a good way of helping the rest of the squad get the time to grow out their characters.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the aspect of what I think I've talked with you kind of about before in ODST as a whole. To be able to step into the persona, so to speak, after Halo 3 would kind of have been a real challenge for the developers like Bungie to do that with Master Chief. I mean, even by the end of Halo 3, we kind of see that Chief is even himself taking on a very kind of character in a persona rather than being able to be filled in like he was in Halo Combat Evolved or even Halo 2. By Halo 3, he's a little defined, and so to be able to have a game like this where again we were able to step into the Halo universe and fill in that persona and everything, it's much different. And speaking of kind of different, Colin, I know that you played ODST, and we actually, you, me, and Noah, and another person, Matt, who I had on the podcast last time, all played it on Lasso and everything. And as a whole, to be able to play that in the experience of 4 players and not like how it is in Halo 3, where it's kind of a story that's supposed to be sort of told with only a singular perspective, kind of like Chief and the Arbiter, and being able to have the other playable elites in Halo 3, ODST is kind of meant to be a game where you can run around with your squad. While the rookie does run around through Mombasa streets at night by himself, a lot of the levels in ODST are still a lot of fun, and they feel like they're meant to be played with multiple players. And Colin, if you kind of want to just talk a little bit about that, maybe what are the weapons and kind of the new ones that we see in ODST?
Yeah, I think what's really unique about the whole ODST campaign is with what you said about having multiple perspectives, I guess. So after every I guess mission, you start to kind of piece together kind of what happened and why you ended up in Mombasa. And I think, while obviously the rest of the Halo games are fun to play and they have their own storyline and stuff like that, I think ODST, by having that different perspective, really kind of brought something new to the table. Um, and it's not even necessarily just Halo, but like even just most games are fixated on one story and one like perspective. And having that multiple playing as the different characters is really interesting. Also, because you play as different characters, I know a lot of or specifically the ODST, they had um, different weapons. So, like Dutch had the Spartan laser, and Romeo had the sniper and stuff like that. So instead of being equipped with the normal um, I guess is it a submachine gun?
Yeah, it
I
is
don't
the
remember the
submachine.
name
It's a
of it. So
silenced one, and that's actually something else I was going to mention. That like the weapons in ODST, like you're saying, not only are they specified to characters, but it almost seems like they're kind of specified to that game. You know, sort of like a nighttime, stealth kind of game.
mhm.
Yeah, and I think that specifically kind of goes along with the fact that ODST is very different and it takes a very defined tone and sort of setting, and it sticks to that, and it really does a good job establishing these new characters that would go on to become fan favorites. Like I know a lot of people love Buck.
Yeah, a lot of people love, I mean, all of the characters, I think, within it. I mean, so much so that we even see the books and whatnot that we're talking about. But just like you were saying, how some people value the game and its difference to the normal Halo games. I mean, it is Halo as we still see it, at least in my eyes. It is the universe. But not only that, they've taken everything that's good about Halo and they've been able to, I guess, reimagine it in a new form, i.e., through the story of Alpha 9 ODST and something that they carry over, like with the silenced weapons, still variations of what we see and what we recognize, but are definitely catered to this new, different kind of game that we want to see. And even so much so that they went and even to the music. And no, I know that like you really, really enjoyed the music of Halo 3 ODST. I just I don't know a lot of the tracks, at least by name. I mean, I could tell you the name of every level in every Halo game, but I couldn't tell you the tracks. But from what you're saying, like you know that off the top of your head. So did you want to talk at all about the music and maybe even some of the other stuff too, like some of the things in games that make it still similar to other ones?
Yeah, so Halo, I love Halo's music, obviously. I know a lot of people do, but Halo's music is something that kind of got me into that more instrumental background music that defined my music taste right now because I generally enjoy listening to video game music and movie music now because of that. And ODST in general had an absolutely fantastic soundtrack. It's one of my favorites. Throwing on some of the great ODST music with that rain sound effect in the background or just with actual rain and going on outside has just been an amazing experience. And it really helped set the tone, like we've been talking about, that's so unique and so different within ODST because you're not the Master Chief. You're not invincible anymore. You're in ODST and you're alone. You're at night. You're using your suppressed weapons. And you have this very different set of music to go along with that. It's still got that Halo feel to it, and it's still got Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore's signature epicness to it, specifically with tracks in the end, such as the Menagerie or even Traffic Jam, things like that. They are absolutely wonderful tracks, and they have that epic scale to them. But not only that, we also have that jazz flair that a lot of people talk about, which is very unique and very different.
It's that shit that puts you to sleep, man. Like
Yeah,
is that you listen to it for
yeah, it's
hours on end.
absolutely great to just sit there and contemplate life listening to great jazz music. I mean, what more could you want? Listen to Neon Night or The Rookie or the Overture theme just with some rain in the background. I know you can find some edits on YouTube. They're fantastic. I highly recommend it.
I honestly think that's like the greatest music like song or clip or whatever
Oh,
in
like
like
the
all the video
score
game
from
is
that game?
the
Yeah.
yeah, well, the overture one is
Oh,
the
okay.
best, I think. But just I think, kind of just to rehash what Noah said is I think ODST had one. I think it has the best, audio. I would argue in kind of gaming, but I think personally in like all of the Halo series, I think it actually has the best because, like he said, it is unique, right? It's not. It has that Halo kind of touch to it, but it's also not some like, pendulum blood sugar insanity kind of thing, but it's that jazz,
Yeah,
quiet,
it's
stealthy sort
totally
of thing.
different from what you would expect from like almost an FPS game, like a first person shooter. It's very almost slow music and stuff like that. And yeah, like you're saying, jazz and all that that's there. I think that's what kind of really made ODST stand out and make it a lot of people's favorites, at least in the sense of the music. I mean, ODST holds a very special place in my heart, if for no other reason than for the score of the game and for seeing the history of people like Buck and whatnot. But before I actually talk about Buck and whatnot, and while we're still on audio, something else, and as we mentioned earlier with the multiple perspectives type thing, if Colin, I know that you wanted to talk about the terminals a little bit in ODST.
Yeah, so obviously Jeremy could definitely go into greater detail and elaborate, but what I thought was really interesting, and I honestly struggled when ODST just came out because I was a noob and didn't really understand any of the story or kind of how everything worked out, is the audio logs and finding it. But basically, what the audio logs were, you go around the entire city of New Mombasa and you collect these audio clips, and I guess you could compare it to like a puzzle sort of, right? So they're just like kind of clues you pick up, um, and you could also they're, I guess, facts. Or is that even a good word,
Yeah, I mean,
Jeremy?
it was
Like, are
kind
they?
of just like a bird's eye view of like the what was going on, but it's kind of hard to say bird's eye because it's all audio. I mean, there is some visual aspect to it, but mainly those are heavily focused again on audio, and why I was still on the topic. It's the terminals really, or the audio logs kind of tell the story of Sadie and her father, and eventually a certain police officer, and what goes on kind of there, and actually talks about Virgil as well, who we see in ODST, who is a Covenant engineer, which is a race that is kind of obsessed with fixing things, for the Covenant, and eventually we'll go on. I'll let Noah talk about a little bit more of the continuation with that.
I just thought what was really interesting about the whole audio log thing is it adds more to the game than just the game face value, right? Instead of just trying to beat the mission, beat the game, whatever, and enjoy the storyline, but it also, like, for those who actually someone like you, Jeremy, or even Noah, also, who really do know more in a greater in-depth knowledge of Halo, it would, provide a fun experience in that way too. So I think that's really neat how they kind of made it. And I know Halo 3 also has the terminals, I think, yeah. Um, but ODST, by having those audio logs, I thought it was a really unique, I guess, aspect to the game.
Yeah,
So
I will definitely say that they were unlike any other. They had, the audio logs. Halo CE, when it came out, didn't have anything. Halo 2, when it came out again, didn't really have anything. Halo 2 did have the skulls, but Halo 3 ended up having skulls and then terminals, but the terminals we see in 3 are all text terminals, and the skulls weren't there. And while there aren't any skulls in Halo 3 ODST, at least in the campaign, there are the audio logs, which I think was a great addition and fits perfectly within that, and tells kind of a secondary story beyond what we're looking at already. And eventually we'll go into, again, like I was saying earlier, with what Noah and Sadie, Virgil, and the characters like that. But before we go forward in time with what's going on here, I think maybe we should go back a little bit and talk a little bit more about the history of Buck before we start talking about what happens after the events of ODST. Because in ODST, we see what happens where clearly Veronica Dare sent Alpha 9 on a mission within the city of New Mombasa to locate the city's superintendent, due to the fact that Virgil was there, and the need to assess the security on the superintendent underground. Through this, we kind of see Virgil come about. We see the sort of relationship that is kind of just we're thrown into between Buck and Dare, as well as Virgil being there, and all of those things are kind of weird. I guess in chronological sense, how we're seeing them, we're just kind of thrown into this, and Bungie did a very great job, or very awesome job, I should say, of making you feel like you really are an ODST and going in this story and everything that's happening. But going back to what I was saying, talking about Buck a little bit more prior to that, Buck's story really starts again when he comes into being an ODST, and back in 2546, which is just only about 6 years before the events of Halo Combat Evolved. Buck is in the what's known as the Battle of Sargasso, I believe is how you pronounce it, and he's actually still the leader, or just recently the leader of Alpha 9. And Alpha 9 was covertly dropped in by a dropship about 5 kilometers away from a city. And they did this because, again, they don't want to be deployed with entry vehicles or anything like that to let them know. It's obviously ODSTs are able to not only be dropped in behind enemy lines for tactical advantage in the sense of flanking someone, but in the sense of also being covert. And we actually see things like that in Halo Legends with the one known as, if I'll remember here in a minute, but one of the characters that we see is Dutch, who's actually a ODST back then as well. And that story from Legends, I can't remember it right now off the top of my head, but it was a very, very good story, and kind of talked about, even like as I said before, the relationship between ODSTs and Spartans, with that segment actually featuring Spartan Cal 141 and the one of the main characters not really getting along with her very well, and kind of showing that headbutting that goes on there. But during this mission, the squad reached where they were going to go, and after eliminating the Covenant forces, they retrieved the chip. And as they attempted to leave, they actually overheard Sarah Palmer, who, as we know, is when we meet her in Halo 4, the commander of the Infinity, and also the commander of all the Spartan fire teams on the Infinity. What ends up kind of happening there is that extraction becomes infeasible. They hear over the radio talking about the lack of extraction, and why there are too many hostiles around them and what's going on. Eventually, Buck, instead of being ordered, as following his orders to retreat, he actually ignores Oni's orders and actually goes to rescue Palmer and Gamma 6, which is another company, or sorry, another squad. And by the time they arrived, Palmer was the only one left. Gamma 6 had died. And together, the ODSTs and Palmer, were able to kill everything. They eliminated all the hostile forces. And eventually, Buck was reprimanded by Dare for disobeying her order, because she'd actually given him the order to retreat. And later, he was actually charged with, or was threatened with, insubordination. However, he didn't receive anything. Something funny that we also see is that Buck was also on Reach during the time when that happened, and he was actually a part of the defense of New Alexandria, which was part of Operation Sword 52. Unfortunately, we're going to kind of not really go into that here for a little bit, but while you're playing Halo Reach, he actually requests assistance during this operation from Spartan B312, who is Noble 6. And after receiving Spuck, he left the center of the city and actually bans the surviving members of Alpha 9 and evacuates Reach. And they actually make mention of it as well on the Level Coastal Highway in ODST. So I find that although the Buck's history and everything is one of someone that we can see who's similar to sort of a character like Sergeant Johnson, has been in the Human Covenant War for a very long time, and his experience and everything has led him to become who he is. And as we see him, and as Noah, as you said, that really charismatic character that we see in Halo ODST, and then actually as we see in Halo 5. And by the time we reach Halo 5, the events of a certain book took place, if you would like to go into that.
Yeah, so before we reach Halo 5, we have New Blood. And so during that, we actually get a lot of background and just knowing of what's been going on with Alpha 9 after the events of ODST. And so during this novel, we actually see that since we all know June survived Reach, he's actually working as the UNSC's Spartan recruiter. And so he approaches Buck as Buck was on a sort of honeymoon sort of a deal with Veronica. And so during his meeting with June asks if he would be interested in joining the Spartan 4 program. And we eventually learn that June actually approached all of Alpha 9. But Dutch and his wife Gretchen decided to retire for the time being, which we'll return to when we cover Bad Blood. But for now, we end up seeing that the rest of Alpha 9 ends up becoming Spartans. And so this book actually gives us a fantastic look at not only the history of Alpha 9, but it also lets us see the Spartan 4 program itself. And it gets us to understand that this is a new era of Spartans. Buck was approached. He wasn't abducted. like with the Spartan 2s. And not only that, but he went through a training regimen that didn't involve the excruciating pain and nonsense that the original Spartan program have involved. And we see that the Spartans consist of a wide variety of volunteers. And we also get to see that eventually the history of Michael Crespo, ends up turning to the insurrectionist side, which is a rather interesting decision that a lot of people were rather hesitant about, and they felt a rather different way. But I think once you consider Bad Blood, we actually see a more clear reasoning as to why Mickey chose that. And if y'all want to talk about Mickey himself and this reality that he turned traitor.
Yeah, so Mickey, and as we see in the book New Blood, actually results in this turning. There's turncoat actually results in getting the rookie killed, which, as we kind of know, would be something that we would need to see happen in order for the rookies, I guess, to tie loose ends on something like that. Similar to the Noble Six and Halo Reach, having a character like that go throughout multiple games is kind of difficult because eventually you do run into it. But to talk a little bit more about Mickey's defection over to the insurrectionist side and maybe a little bit of history about the insurrectionists, to explain them for any people who don't know, the insurrectionists are a group of individuals, or at least separate groups, they don't necessarily have to be united, that are very upset with the UEG, or the United Earth Government, which was in place somewhat before the UNSC, which is the I believe the United Nations Space Corps is what that is, and what ends up
Space Command.
Space Command, there it is, yeah, the Space Command. So the UEG was originally in place and still somewhat is in place. However, the UNSC has come and militarized everything, and one of the big things and reasoning for this was how fast the Covenant were defeating the outer colonies and even reaching the inner colonies. And so in certain books like the Cole Protocol and even Contact Harvest, you see the need for the government to be somewhat more militarized to be able to stand against the Covenant. Well, in this decision to militarize, because of the rapid speed that the UEG or humanity was losing the outer colonies to the Covenant, the outer colonies being decimated within a decade, as stated in Homecoming, which is a Halo Legends snippet at the very beginning, they decided that the outer colonies weren't really worth trying to save unless there was anything there worth saving. And so many individuals on planets were just left to the Covenant to be glassed and killed. And as we know and see in the book Contact Harvest, the Covenant don't take prisoners because humanity is a direct affront to their gods. The prophets have skewed the religion in such a way that humanity could never join the Covenant, and it somewhat kind of sticks with them that you do not want to be captured by the Covenant. Well, as a result, and as you would see, the insurrectionists, who, while there were some already kind of started before the Covenant ever appeared in 2525, due to the same kind of reasoning with the United Earth Government, where the closer you were to Earth, the better resources, the more money you probably had, and the better off you were, while the farther away you were, in the outer colonies, there was a lack of everything. And even in things like Hunt the Truth, we hear that glassed outer colonies and all this stuff have bad records. They don't have the ability to be able to have access to things medically, financially, or even economically like the inner colonies in Earth do. And eventually, when the Covenant came in, this sparked a huge problem, and many people who felt like they were left to die by the UEG and the UNSC ended up becoming insurrectionists and doing things on their own because they didn't feel like that they needed to serve or be a part of a government or even a group of people, a part of humanity that left them to die. And so Mickey, as I'll let you go into a little bit more after I sort of talk about his defection here, has good reasoning for why, at least in Bad Blood, where he talks about why he did what he did. What originally happens is Mickey participates in a mission alongside Buck and Romeo at a United Rebel Front facility on Talista, I believe is how you pronounce it, to recover a captured Huragok, which is going to be one of the engineers that we see. And that engineer's name is Quick to Adjust, and his human handler, Sadie. And so the engineer that we see that they call Virgil, or I believe we kind of call him Virgil. Virgil is actually the city superintendent, quick to adjust, is the engineer that we see there. And Sadie is the one that we see. And so the three were sent on a mission by Dare due to their past experiences with Virgil, or at least the Huragok. And on the way to the base, they were surrounded and captured by these insurrectionist forces, where Mickey actually reveals to his teammates that, he was turning code. And the rebels that were led by Dr. Sheen, I believe is how you pronounce it, and that guy is somewhat covered in New Blood, and he has some history. However, I wouldn't say he's extremely prevalent. But he led Buck and Romeo back to their base, and eventually Mickey inadvertently pushes Romeo down a hill, and there's a lot of incidents that go on that make Mickey to become a very bad guy very quickly. However, this ends up going very south, and what ends up happening here is that the rookie is killed, and eventually we lead into the end of New Blood, where the rookie is dead, Mickey is turncoat, and all that's really left and that we know of Alpha 9 is going to be Buck and Romeo. And Mickey, where he stands. And leading from there, I think the last thing that we would talk about is Bad Blood.
Yeah, I think before we move on, though, I wanted to see, Colin, what do you think about all of this? Because I know this might be some new information to you, so I wanted to see that sort of perspective of what do you think, knowing now that A, all of Alpha 9 is now Spartan, B, we know that the rookie is dead, and C, that Mickey actually betrays the UNSC.
Honestly, I would think would be interesting would be to possibly see a second Halo, or like a not an ODST 2 necessarily, but like a new game focusing on the roster of Alpha 9 when they're in the Spartan 4 program, or I mean those that are in the Spartan 4 program rather. Um, I don't know, Jeremy. Like, what are your thoughts on that? That's something that I've always kind of thought about. Um,
Well,
and I
it's definitely,
suppose it has
yeah.
potential to
It's
be
something that
a.
would be extremely popular, and with how they had ODST when it came out, at least for the time, and what lore was written in, with Bungie, it would seem very possible that ODS2 would be there. However, before we kind of talk about a new game, like with saying like an ODST2 or something like that, I think that it would be better that we kind of finish up the story of ODS or of Alpha 9 up to the point now, so that we could predict what would it be like in the future and compare it to what we've seen in the past. Because Bad Blood does fill in a lot of very important information about the Spartan 4 program and everything. And for people who don't know, that's kind of some crucial info that would be nice to know. I mean, all of a sudden in Halo 5, we kind of see Buck there, and he's a Spartan, and there really is no in-game, I guess, evidence that change was there. You're kind of just introduced to him on the first level. I mean, yes, Buck does make the mention where he says, I love being an ODST. Things were so much simpler, none of the gray area, and you can just point and shoot. But it's still, to just kind of be thrown in and introduced to him like that is crazy. So to kind of finish up the rest of the story of Alpha 9 up to this point, what would that be? I mean, how does Bad Blood really kind of turn the tables on a lot of the stuff that we're even talking about now into what we'll see probably here in the future?
Yeah, so Bad Blood actually serves as not a prologue to Halo 5, but it also kind of serves as, that ODST 2 sort of events, and it also kind of sets up the potential for another game featuring this Alpha 9 squad. So essentially what happens with Bad Blood is that we pick up right after the events of Halo 5. So Osiris and Blue Team have to escape Genesis and reunite with the Infinity. And so after that happens, and after we actually get to see these short reuniting between the Arbiter and the Master Chief, because, Halo 5 ends with Blue Team arriving on St. Helios. So that novel actually explains a little bit more about what happened, and it gives you a little bit more closure to the ending of Halo 5. And right after Cyrus and Blue Team arrive on the Infinity, we learn that Buck is looking for Dare because, with the created event, communications aren't going very well. People don't know where a lot of people are, and we don't know the state of the galaxy at this point. And so eventually we learn that Veronica Dare has found Buck, and she has a new mission for him. And so that mission involves reuniting Alpha 9, including Mickey. And so, of course, Buck is very hesitant about that because, as the novel sort of describes, we see that, or we learn that the reason that Buck decided to forego leading his own team and join Fireteam Osiris was actually because he just didn't feel right about having someone he knew and thought he could trust betray his team and sort of lose that connection. So I think that was a really well done thing that kind of justified having Buck as a subordinate on Osiris. And we also get his opinion on the team, which we actually see is rather favorable. He enjoys working and operating with this new group. And so now that Buck has his mission, he has to go reunite with Romeo. And so we end up seeing Buck and Veronica travel to Balaho, which is the Ungoi or Grunt homeworld. And we get a canon appearance of the Grunt Goblins, which we actually see in Halo 5 Warzone, which is a lot of fun.
Those are the
But
mechs, right? The
yeah, those are
okay. And
those
so those are actually like
Grunt mech
lore
suits.
confirmed, like canon
Yeah, now
confirmed.
they are, or I'm sure some other place they've confirmed them, but we get to see them in a
There as
book and we
well.
get to
Yeah.
see them interacted with. So that was good. But essentially, we see that the Ungoi have actually joined Cortana's created forces and bowed down because, they're grunts. They're not really going to stand up and fight for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they're actually attacking a human embassy, which leads Buck to have to rescue Romeo. And then after that, we end up having the team travel to the Spartan 4 training facility to somehow break Mickey out of jail because that's what they have to do. Because obviously, with the whole events of New Blood, we see that Mickey is a traitor, and so because of that, he has to be locked away in a special prison. And what better prison than an entire facility full of Spartans headed by June? And so, after some variety of events that take place, we learn that not only has the created influence affected some of the higher level AI, like the Leonidas, which was the station AI there, but we see that in a lot of AI, it's not actually something that's explicit. Some of them are more subtly Cortana. And so after dealing with that issue, Buck is able to break Mickey out of prison and sort of form a hesitant and reluctant alliance. But not only does he break Buck out of prison, or not Buck, sorry, does he break Mickey out of prison, he actually reunites with Dutch and Gretchen, his wife, because we learn that they didn't enjoy retirement. They didn't enjoy that life. So they actually signed up and took the offer and became Spartan 4s. And so now we have the entirety of Alpha 9 back together. And so they go on this mission. And I should have also mentioned that they were with Sadie and Virgil as well, who can now communicate with humans due to some Oni technology, which is a lot of fun. We get to see his input on things. And so after completing their mission, I won't spoil their mission for you, because I would recommend reading Bad Blood. It's a fantastic novel and a fantastic piece of Halo lore. But essentially, after this, we learn that Mickey is reinstated as a Spartan. He's given his armor and everything back. And Alpha 9 is essentially back together again. Band is back together. These people are all operating as Spartans. They're doing missions for the UNSC, and
And
that's
they
it.
are Alpha 9, like the squad as well,
They
right?
are
Like they're
Alpha
all
9.
actually because Buck in that book actually gets separated from Osiris, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we
Because
see, that's crazy. Then, as we see, like in ODST and Colin, as you were mentioned earlier, it would be really great then to see possibly a another piece of lore, book, or even what I really hope would be a game that could hopefully somewhat do kind of what we've done before, or what they've done before, what Bungie did with ODST. Make a actual game, full of content and a story and ability for something to be there. But like ODST, and hopefully you can. I don't know if they would fill in with another player character, like we see with the rookie, or maybe they would have us play it as some of the members of Alpha 9 or something like that. Colin, what would you think about that then, knowing now that Bad Blood kind of ends with all of Alpha 9 back together, short of the rookie, and all of them are also now Spartans as well? How do you think that would be? What would you like to see then if there was a game, or like how do you think that would be envisioned?
So, I think with the whole if there was to be a Halo ODST 2, obviously it won't be called that, like I said. I think it should probably stick to more, campaign story mode, because I feel like that the rest of, or like Halo 1 or 1, 2, and 3, the one like with Chief, for example, is more, campaign, but then also has the multiplayer, and stuff like that. Um, so I wouldn't really want to see a multiplayer, or it's not really want to see, but I can't envision a multiplayer in that sense, um, being brought into it. Um, I think what would be interesting though is, similar to ODST or regular ODST, is Firefight. Um, Jeremy, I didn't know if you wanted to mention anything about Firefight, but I think, um, that'd be pretty interesting.
Yeah,
And
so talking about it then, like what you're saying with it, not really focusing on multiplayer, thinking and looking at it more so in the sense of just, it's a story and things like that. Firefight was something that was actually introduced in ODST and with Alpha 9 and how we see it. And funny enough, because of the addition of Firefight, and honestly, what was amazing was the length of story that we saw, was that due to ODST being ODST, it was in originally ODST was supposed to be named Halo Recon, and it was similar but kind of more from the perspective of it was still the perspective of an ODST, but it was under the name Recon. It was in development, but the biggest piece about it, what I'm trying to get to, I guess, here is that it wasn't DLC like we see many other games have, where like in Gears of War and Mass Effect and a lot of other games that were in and around that time, they actually have campaign portions or side segment portions that are part of, that affect the game, that are DLC. And ODST was not like that. They were actually making, Bungie actually went through and made a whole game, based on just the ODST or the recon idea, which I found was really amazing. And as we can see now, like ODST in itself, it was definitely worth it. I would like to believe that it was worth it, not only for the developer end of things, but for the fan end of things too, to see things in that perspective and to do that. And so, for a new game, I think it would be really cool to see the Spartans operate in the same manner that we see in ODST, where it's supposed to be more of a stealth like thing, and that it should be a little bit more, still involved with what's going on in the Halo universe, similar to how it was, not, or I guess not similar, but different to how it was with Halo 2, because in Halo 2 it wasn't the same. And Colin, I know you played like the early games, but what do you think about, like, with the fact now that they're Spartans, should they operate like how they were before, or should it be closer to what's going on? How do you think about
you
that?
know, it's really interesting. I think, this kind of ties into what we talked about in terms of like the music and kind of the theme and the mood that, ODST was all about. It was that, that dark, kind of stealthy kind of, um, the gameplay was pretty, stealthy, and you're at night and stuff like that for the most part, especially when you were the rookie. So I think if there were to be a game of, all of Alpha 9, or the Spartan Fours, I think it should be. I personally would think it'd be more appropriate to have the game more like a Halo, like a mainline, um, kind of a style of game.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, the mainline is focused on Chief and, Spartans. So I don't really personally see it fitting in, a play style like that fitting in with the ODST theme.
Yeah, so
But
because
that's
ODST was separate, it needs to be a separate story. Now that they're Spartans, they kind of can't really, they can't do that anymore. It's not possible to
exactly. So
differentiate
it's
it.
going to be
Okay.
the gameplay, I think, should be separate, but, should recognize obviously the character history and that sort of stuff, but it should be. I would think it should be like a completely new game. Essentially, it's just you would obviously keep the history of the characters and all that sort of stuff, but um,
Well, Noah,
yeah,
was there anything I guess then you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, so I think that you'll have the right idea with the fact that it would have to play more like something we're used to with the fact that they're all Spartans. But I definitely think that no matter what, it should keep that sort of character-driven narrative basis behind it because I think that's what really separates the ODST squad from the rest because they were given their own time to shine. And not only that, but you have the fantastic, Firefly cast doing a lot of the voices, which is a lot of fun.
Again, that's going
So
back
it's
to the
great.
audio. That yeah,
Yeah.
everything about ODST with the rain, slight
Mm.
rain, music, everything about that was very huge. And Halo's always been known for having great audio, whether it's music or voice casting or things like that. And that's really something I would like to definitely see in another game if it was to come back.
Yeah, and we already have some of the weapons making a return in Halo 5. So they have the new and updated models, so why not put them to use? You saw the suppressed weapons in the Halo 5 rec system, so why
Yeah, the
not put those
gunfighter
things to a
magnum,
campaign?
the suppressed magnum and stuff like that.
Yeah.
one thing I would like to kind of touch on, Jeremy, or mention and bring up is, like obviously Halo 5 had like Fireteam Osiris and Blue Team and stuff like that. What about is that sort of similar to ODST, but do you think if the new ODST 2 could kind of incorporate that? Because you obviously played, as a member on Fireteam Osiris and then a member on Blue Team.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think kind of combining or not combining, but being how do I explain this?
Well, here, let me see if I can help you then. I think that concept that you're talking about would work much better for ODST, like an ODST 2 type game, than it did for
Yeah.
Halo 5. Because, as Noah said, this is very, not so much story driven, but character driven. As we see, every single one of these characters has been fleshed out very, very well and have incredible backstory to them. I mean, in Halo 5, two of the members of Fireteam Osiris are not really known. I mean, no backstory pretty much at all prior to it. And a lot of people, with Blue Team don't really know a lot of the Blue Team stuff. I mean, they had to come up with the Fall of Reach, and I believe they made the animated short just so that some people, who weren't super in-depth lore heavy and reading the books could see who they were. And I think this is an amazing point to talk about, that would be a much better concept applied to an ODST2 than it was for like Halo 5, because playing the characters, while for a lot of the lore heavy people in Halo 5 when they were playing Blue Team felt really cool, and how individualized it was, because for me that actually is one of the things I like about Halo 5 is seeing different HUDs for different Spartans, knowing that they're wearing different armor and knowing that there's an individualistic, property to playing certain characters, and even having, as you said, Colin, different gun loadouts when you play them. I just think that would work so much better and actually be a good concept to use in an ODST2 game. Noah, if there was anything you wanted to add on last to that before we wrap this up.
Yeah, I just think the main potential challenge with that idea is that you would have to figure out how to balance that sort of giant cast of characters because with ODST we saw it was pretty well done in the sense that everybody got their time to shine. They got their chance to do something memorable, something cool, something that was them. You got to see who they were, what they're all about. But if they were to be incorporated into, say, Halo Infinite in the same manner that Osiris was, it would have to be done in a way that gave you more than enough time to experience a Chief story because we need some more Master Chief time after Halo 5. But not only that, but we would have to have time for Alpha 9 and their new squad to flesh out their own characters some more and have time to develop and have time to talk about what they've done instead of just thrusting you with this new team that you don't really know anything about.
Yeah, so I think that would be a great and amazing, awesome, amazing point you brought up, Colin. And I could say is that seeing something like that, having the ability to make a game so that they can, 343 could do something like Noah's describing, give players a more of an idea of what's going on with the characters and not just kind of thrusting them into a game, would be absolutely amazing in a way to do that. And balancing it would be very difficult, but at that point, I mean, they have a amazing cast to pull from, voice actor wise, character wise, and everything. It's not people that we don't know. It's all people that are familiar with and already have good backstory that fans really enjoy. But if there was anything else you guys wanted to say, as we're approaching about an hour here, is gonna wrap this up. Is there anything you guys wanted to talk about or say prior to wrapping it up?
No, that was good. I mean, I couldn't really explain that last topic well, but you actually explained it perfectly. So thank you,
Well,
Jeremy.
I don't feel bad. I was hoping, because when you brought it up, like I envisioned, I saw what you were saying and thought about Halo 5, and I thought that's really good. I mean, something that when you play Halo 5 seemed like it was so much time and effort was put in, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't enjoy the campaign of the game, so seeing that kind of hard work that was put in not come out is something that I think should be noted, even for a game that's like that. Noah, if there was anything else you wanted to add prior to this?
Yeah, again, that was a good speculative point to talk about because that was something that a lot of people, most of the problems people had with Halo 5 stemming from Fireteam Osiris. If we were to have had something a little bit more familiar, a little bit more just Buck, because Buck was a side character within Halo 5. It's not something that's really debatable. He was just second fiddle to Locke at this point. So having him be a lead instead would have been a little bit better and something to ease people into this transition to a new fire team. But I do think that they ended up explaining Buck's reasoning for not wanting to lead, but still operate as a Spartan within the novel. However, I do think that's one of the things that 343 has to work on is having that lore more accessible within the games themselves rather
Yeah, not
than
just in the
forcing you
books.
to
Yeah,
go out and
go
read the
in
books.
super
Even though
extended
they're
lore.
great books, they have
Oh
great
yeah, they're
information.
amazing. I love
Yeah.
reading the books. So, well, if that's going to be it then, guys, thank you so much for joining me again on the podcast. Again, we eat up time like it's nothing on here. So, sorry, guys, for the super lengthy one again. But I hope you guys enjoyed being on. I hope that you guys will be here for the future. I know that we have the 4-person podcast that we do plan on being, extenuatingly long here in late December as we get close to Christmas. So, if you guys have any thoughts on that, if you guys are one last piece before we're good to go.
Yeah, just get ready to open a great podcast up for Christmas. It's going to be a
Yeah,
lot of fun.
big one.
Yeah, excited for it.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much again for hopping on. Hope you guys had a great time. Remember, guys, I post videos every Saturday for my theories, and these podcasts come out every Wednesday. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.